Peacock Feathers by Temple Bailey. Chapter 8. 1. The next day I started back to my old home. It snowed all the afternoon and through the night, and the flakes, falling steadily, seemed to bury my dead hopes. My father met me at the station, his little mare hitched to a small sleigh. As we rode along, the jingle of the bells made a cheerful accompaniment to our conversation. But I was not cheerful. My mood was melancholy. I at once poured my story into my father's sympathetic ears. I have lost her. You can't be sure of that, Jerry. I am sure. Youth is always final. It may be only the first act. Tomorrow the curtain may go up, and you'll see the rest of the play. In spite of my pessimism, I found myself warmed by a faint hope. He was so wise, so steadfast. I was soothed and sustained by the strength that was in him. I tried to tell him how I felt. His response had a touch of deep emotion. I am glad you came to me, my boy. I can't tell you how I have missed you. And I knew, even as he said it, that what he had missed was not merely my physical presence, but the spiritual communion, the meeting of mind and soul and heart. We came to the little house at dusk, and the lights shone out in a blur of orange against the snowy background. As we entered the little sitting room, I was aware of Aunt Mary's taste in the changes which had been made. There was the twinkle of old brasses in front of the open fire, and paisley shawl thrown over the couch gave a touch of mellow color. There were holly berries in a dull green vase. 2 comfortable black cats were silhouetted against the blaze. The table was spread in the sitting room, because the new heating plant had not yet been installed, and the dining room was too cold. My grandmother sat in my mother's place, and my father said his simple grace. Aunt Mary was opposite me, and surveyed me with a beaming countenance. It was good to be there with the 3 of them, to feel their affection and their delight in my presence. I was hungry, too, after my long abstinence, for I had eaten nothing on the train, and I was glad of the hearty food. Remembering my tastes, Aunt Mary had provided creamed codfish and baked potatoes, and there was a rich dark cake with fruit in it, soda biscuits with hot maple syrup to eat on them, and a great dish of cottage cheese. I thought of the feast at Olga's, only one night between. People of 2 worlds. What would Mimi think of this? Would she shudder and draw back? I hate attics, echoed in my ears. Would she see the homely charm of my father's house, the warmth, the light, the loveliness of that simple grace? Aunt Mary's eager questions drew me out. I told them something of the ball. "And did you dance, Jerry?" my grandmother asked. "Of course he danced, Mother," Aunt Mary said. "Why shouldn't he?" "Well, you never danced, Mary, nor Stephen." Across the table I saw my father's glance meet Aunt Mary's, and their eyes danced as their feet might have done had they been brought up under less severe discipline. I told them about the banquet, of ices frozen in pink rose forms, of rose-edged hats of spun sugar filled with bonbons, of salads served in pink paper cases, of lobster cooked with sherry, of oysters in pastry shells. "It is all like a fairy tale," sighed Aunt Mary. "I should think this house would seem cramped and commonplace." "I'm glad to be here," I said with sincerity. "All of that life is hollow, artificial. I hate it." She gave me a shrewd glance. She guessed, I think, the truth, that I had not found the life in St. Louis hollow and hateful until something had gone wrong with it for me. When it was time for bed, my father showed me to my old room. It seemed to have shrunk in the time I had been away, and I missed the comforts of the great hotel, my bath, my warmth, the electric lighting. Yet I was glad of the silence, and old associations. The little house seemed wrapped in peace. Before we separated for the night, my father read from his shabby Bible, and his prayer gave thanks for the return of his son. When at last I was ready for bed, I opened my window wide to the night. I felt now and then a snowflake blow in, but I was covered up to my ears by the great quilts which my mother had made and by a blanket which her own mother had woven. I liked the crisp coolness of the air in my face and hoped that it might make me sleep. But my eyes would not shut. All the deadness and dullness which had weighed me down as I had travelled in the train flared up now in burning agony. Mimi, 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 was the unceasing reiteration. I had lost her, lost her, lost her. The wind seemed to howl it as it swept around the corners. I fought against a rising storm of emotion. I shook with dry sobs. At last the tears came. I lay there, gripped by the awful despair of youth, which sees no hope ahead. I do not know how long this mood lasted, but I was roused by a faint whirring sound. As I raised myself to listen, there was a tingling touch of cold fur against my hand. One of the black pussycats had found my open window and had sought shelter. I lifted the edge of the upper quilt and she curled down in the warmth. Then she sang, a comforting, soothing song. It swept me back to my childhood when the grandmother of this very kitten had kept me company. The howl of the wind died down, the whirring song ceased, and when I waked the sky was clear and the sun shining. 2. I learned that my father and Aunt Mary were making many plans for Christmas. There was to be a tree in our barn, and the children of the church would go from house to house singing carols. I had never had a tree as a child. My mother had preserved the Puritan tradition. But my father and Aunt Mary were two of a kind. They felt that one might be good and merry. Sadness was not necessarily a sign of saintliness. They had included me in their plans. I was to be the shepherd who first saw the star, coming in with a lamb in my arms to tell the glad tidings. I was too to lead the little carolers from house to house. As time went on, I found myself living two lives, an outer one in which I shared in the affairs and interests of the people of the parsonage, and an inner one in which I talked continually to Mimi, explaining my point of view, accusing, excusing, coming in the end to no conclusions, held back by my pride from writing to her, yet having moments when it seemed as if pride were nothing, and that love were the only thing. So the weeks passed, 3 of them. I did some writing in my father's little study in the church, which he had occupied since my grandmother and aunt had been a part of his household. I worked there mornings, while he made his calls, and he occupied the study in the afternoon. We shared the tasks about the farm, and I must confess that there was something comforting to me in the serene animal life, the plump and confiding cows, the friendly little mare, and the eager old watchdog, the affectionate pussycats. I fed the chickens and the pigeons, tossed great forkfuls of hay and straw into the stalls, cleaned the snow from the walks, wore my old clothes, and came in ravenous 3 times a day to Aunt Mary's good meals. I would sit in the kitchen and watch her cook. There were pre-Christmas preparations, and I helped her seed the raisins and chop the nuts. At night we popped corn on the hearth and sometimes made taffy. Aunt Mary had the type of domesticity which makes a home of any house. Mentally keen, well-read, alert, she did not scorn the physical tasks which contributed to the order and beauty of her abode. It was this quality in her which helped me to sway level. She kept me busy, and I liked the busyness. I must confess that I went often very reluctantly to my writing, dreading the loneliness. My father's study was a plain little place, warmed by a tight drum stove in which wood had to be poked at regular intervals. There was a table on which stood my rented typewriter, and there were cases for my father's books. The window framed a vista of snow-flattened trees, baked by the bright sapphire of the lake. The books in the cases were not all theological ones. There were the poets in blue and crimson and gold bindings. I read Browning, I remember, with new eyes. One had to live and suffer, I decided, to understand his men and women. And I had lived and suffered. There was a door leading from the study into the church. Now and then, torn by dark thoughts, I would go into the church and place the ales in the icy air. Sometimes I threw myself on my knees, trying to believe that God was in this holy place and that He would help me. Because perhaps genius is born of travail, I wrote a story which seemed to me strong. I read it to my father. "It has depth," he told me. "I have lived and loved," I said, gloomily aware of my dramatic kinship to all the tragic artists of the ages. It was a part of my father's charm that he could look below the surface of my boyish affectations and see my real agony of mind. "Perhaps, dear boy, this is your high moment. People who live at their ease very rarely achieve." "But I want happiness, father." "You will find it when you least expect it." I wanted happiness then and there. I had a feeling that youth might fly from me if I waited, and I should be left old and lacking capacity to enjoy. If I could not have Mimi, I would have no one. So the years stretched ahead of me, empty. 3. There were moments, however, when I felt very young indeed. I found in the Christmas rehearsals a rollicking, picturesque quality which was almost Elizabethan. Observing my small carolers, I wondered whether, after all, the modern world might not be returning to the red-blooded Christianity of older times, and whether it might not be actually more spiritual in its results than the attenuated philosophies of the present day. However that might be, the little folks in their bright sweaters, with bits of holly stuck in the stocking caps, were like something out of the illustrations in my old nursery rhyme books. They played pranks on each other, piped their merry tunes, and gave me a sort of worshipful admiration, which warmed my sore heart. "You are a perfect Pied Piper, Jerry," my Aunt Mary told me. "You have the children hypnotized." I had heard, while in St. Louis, some old French carols, "Un flambeau Jeannette Isabelle, quand Dieu naquit à Noël, à minuit fut fait un réveil," and others. I found English translations and taught them to the children. On Christmas Eve, I led them from house to house. "Bring a torch, Jeannette Isabelle, bring a torch to the cradle run. It is Jesus, good folk of the village, Christ is born and Mary calling. Ah, beautiful is the mother, ah, beautiful is her son." We sang this in front of one hospitable mansion, where we were asked to stop and have refreshments. As I came with my little band into the dining room, I knew I was much observed. I had on a green sweater, and my green cap was in my hand. I saw in a mirror, as I passed, that my cheeks were very red, and that my ruffled hair gave out deep gold lights. I was handsome, and I knew it. I wished that Mimi might see me in this new aspect. I wished that she might be with us, drinking hot chocolate and eating frosted cakes. I had a feeling that she would like it, and that her radiance would shine out here as it had never shone, even on that last night in the rosy ballroom, out under the stars again. When at Christmas Christ was born, in fair Palestine, All observed that solemn day with a joy divine. There was neither churl nor king who did not a present bring. I let the others go on ahead of me, singing. Above me the sky was illuminated by an effable brightness. Midnight was not far away. Centuries ago, on such a night, a great miracle had been wrought. But the day of miracles was over. Men prayed, and there was no response. In my 3 weeks of agony, I had asked that some word might come to me from Mimi. One of my small carolers came back to me. "Why aren't you singing, Cherry?" I lifted her in my arms. She was such a tiny thing, and put her on my shoulder. "You sing for me. You are so high up, they will think I am singing." Her little arm was around my neck. There was one who gave a lamb with his heart and soul, and another brought some milk in a little bowl. One beneath his smock, this said, brought a humble gift of bread. She stopped her thin piping long enough to say, "You sing too, Cherry?" But I could not. I felt that my voice would break, as my heart was broken. I wanted Mimi. The midnight celebration in our barn was a great success. We had the wise men, the shepherds, the manager. I came in with the lamb under my arm and said that I had seen the angels and had heard their voices. People of 2 worlds, I wondered how Mimi was spending her Christmas Eve, and Andy and the rest of them. I wondered what they would have thought of me with the lamb under my arm, and whether anyone among them spoke of Mary or the wise men, and would I, if I had been among them, have spoken of these sacred things? And was it, after all, with me, merely a matter of environment? After it was over, Aunt Mary and I walked back to the house together. My father was driving home a sleigh full of children. As we came into the sitting room, Aunt Mary said, "There's some mail for you on the kitchen table, Jerry. One of the neighbors went to the post office." She sat by the fire while I looked over the envelopes. I found a letter from Lionel. The rest seemed to be Christmas cards, many of them with the St. Louis postmark. My heart seemed suddenly to stop beating as I saw Mimi's angular individual script. She had sent me a card, and across one corner she had scrawled, "I am sorry, Jerry. Let's be friends." And out there in the night I had said there were no miracles. I laughed aloud, and Aunt Mary turned and looked at me. "Something pleasant?" With the card in my hand, I flung myself on the floor beside her. "Aunt Mary," I asked, "were you ever in love?" "Oh, a long time ago, Jerry." "Then you know what this means to me." I thrust the card into her hands. "I thought the thing was all ended, and now you see what she says." She read the scrawled words and smiled down at me. "And it has made you happy?" I could shout it from the housetops. I hugged my knees. "If you only knew how adorable she is." "I can guess," she replied. Sitting there by the fire, I told her of Mimi, her beauty, her pride, the peacock colors that she wore. "She's different from anyone else, and if I had half a chance I could win her. She has been used to luxury, but father says if she really cared, that wouldn't count." "Your father is a dreamer, Jerry." I said sharply, "You mean that luxury does count?" "With such a woman, yes. She is what her life has made her. It would be an experiment to transplant her. Only a great passion would make it possible. Some day I'll make her care enough to do it." "How can you make her?" "Aunt Mary, when I am with her, I dominate her, and Uncle Jerry says it is masterfulness that wins." "Perhaps it wins, but does it hold?" "If I can win her, I can keep her," I said doggedly. "Don't be too sure. Women are strange creatures." I stared in the fire. Father says if you hold the soul of a woman in your hand. She breathed a soft sigh. That sounds like him, and it is true, but men don't know it. The men who look for the spiritual quality in their wives are the successful husbands. I'm not so sure, I said, that I want to be a successful husband. I want to be a mad lover. Romance, Cherry? Well, I hope you'll have it. I missed it because I tried to be sensible. Perhaps it would have been sensible to grasp it while it was in my hand. But my mother advised me, and I thought she was wise. Perhaps she was. Who knows? She sat looking into the fire, a little smile on her lips, but I was sure she was not smiling in her heart. 4. With the rest of the mail unopened, I went upstairs to write a letter to Mimi. I could not wait. I wanted to pour out my heart to her. The room was cold, so I wrapped myself in a warm robe, set my lamp on my little table, and propped Mimi's card against it. It was a charming thing, illumined in her colors, green and blue and copper. I wrote pages which I tore up. I wrote other pages which I copied. It was not to be, I had decided, a love letter. Mimi had asked for my friendship. I would assure her of its eternal quality. I would be her friend though the heavens fell. It took 12 sheets in which to tell her. I heard my father come in. He and Aunt Mary talked for a time, and then the house was silent. And in that silence I read at last Lionel's letter. I had not heard from him or from Bernice since I left St. Louis, although I had written them. He said that things were not going as well with him and Bernice as he had hoped. Mrs. Barry had forgiven them, and Mr. Barry was making them a small allowance. He had not been willing, he had told his daughter, to entirely support her husband. He doesn't realize, Lionel complained, that a little help now would do the trick. He wanted me to come back. He and Bernice were to leave the hotel, where they had been staying since their honeymoon, and to take an apartment. They would be glad to let me have a room, and he and I could go on with our work. I need you to tell me I can do it, Jerry. We are a bit hard up, but we are not regretting our marriage. The game is worth the candle, and having Bernice is greater luck than I deserve. We are all expecting the news of Mimi's engagement to follow. He is rushing her no end. So far she has held him off, but you know how her mother feels about it, so it is probably only a question of time. She called me up this morning to ask your address, so I fancy you'll be hearing from her. I wish you had Andy's money, old chap. I tell you to go to it and cut him out. Money, money, money! I had none to lay at the feet of the woman I loved. And of what use to dally with a friendship which must end with her marriage to another? Why should she torture me with the offer of it? To see me flutter like a butterfly on a pin? I tore the letter which I had written her into bits. I opened the window and flung the scraps of paper out into the night. They went whirling off on the wings of the wind. The wind too buffeted me and blew the hair back from my face. Yet I did not feel it. The only thing I felt was the sharp stab of the thought that friendship with Mimi would be futile. I wanted more than that. I should always want more. So my answer to her overture was silence. I know now that it was the most potent reply I could have made. Had my letter gone to her, she would have rested in the certainty that I was hers forever. Failing that assurance, she thought of me, wondered, made Andy no promises. I wrote to Lionel and told him I was doing good work and should stay with my father. I sent news later of the acceptance of my story. I hoped that he might pass the news of my little triumph on to Mimi. but I did not ask him to do it. I wrote too to Olga, but got little satisfaction from her. She had not the pen of a ready writer, and I felt sensitively that she resented that scene in the library, when she had hoped to play Lady Bountiful and had had her gift flung back in her face. So the life in the old city on the Mississippi gradually receded. I found myself entering into the activities of our small community. I took charge of the church music, organized a children's choir, and rehearsed a pageant which would take the place in the summer and would give something of the picturesque history of our township. Thus the days passed. I was unhappy, but my unhappiness was tempered by the knowledge of my growing powers. And in a sense the life was satisfying. It was so stable, so free from the irritating excitements. It was as serene as the lake which stretched out to far horizons. It was as aspiring as the high heavens which arched above us. It was in March that the spring began to come to the countryside. The snow melted and left wet patches of brown earth. The mornings glimmered with a new brightness. There was a golden haze at dusk, instead of the sharp clearness of winter sunsets. Then came April, burgeoning and blooming, with daffodils in the garden and the orchards pink and white, with lambs and little chickens and the nesting birds. May, with strawberries in great blue bowls on our breakfast table, and peonies in rose and crimson masses along the edges of our stone walk. Soft winds blew over the fields and fluttered 1,000 leaves of green and silver. Our great lake was a sheet of azure, with clouds like puffs of thistledown. My father and I, in our walks in the spring twilight, often went to the lake. I was writing a story about it, only in my story the lake was the sea, and my hero, with a buccaneering spirit, which I felt transcended my own timidities, carried the heroine off against her will in a very modern ship. I outlined the plot to my father. That is what I ought to do, carry Mimi off. But, failing a ship, Jerry? He was smiling. I felt that it was not a smiling matter. I might carry her off anyhow. Modern life isn't like that. Why shouldn't it be? It is too complex. It remains then for somebody to simplify it. And you want to be a pioneer, Jerry? Why not? Why shouldn't a man find new worlds right here in the midst of our civilization? Why doesn't somebody write about it? Why doesn't somebody say, here is fresh spiritual soil, just as our adventuring grandfathers said, here is land for us to make ours. Father, there are new countries in the midst of crowded communities. My thought was not quite clear, but I got it at last. I mean, if some strong souls would say, let us strip life of its complexities. People have tried it. Well, they can try again. I'm going to write about it. Good. You may be a preacher yet, Jerry. I weighed this seriously. It showed the change in me that I should feel there might be a call to me not unlike that which had come to my father. I might sway a larger world. Then, all in a moment, everything that the winter had brought to me was swept away. I came home late one night from my choir practice. We had rehearsed the pageant, and I was proud of my work, and had walked under the spring moon with a quickened sense of all I had achieved, tingled with an exquisite melancholy of my memories of Mimi. When I arrived at the house, everyone was in bed. My letters were on the table. I read them standing by the sitting-room lamp. The last one I opened was in a long legal envelope, and there were papers enclosed. The letter was from a Denver lawyer and told me of my Uncle Jerry's death. I was, he informed me, my uncle's sole heir. The papers had to do with my inheritance. 5. When I read the lawyer's letter a second time, I went into my father's room. I had the lamp in my hand, and the light waked him. He sat up at once, looking rather young and boyish, with his ruffled hair and open collar. "What is it, Jerry?" "Father, I shouldn't have waked you, but I wanted you to see this." I held out the letter to him. Then, conscious for the first time of the shock it might be, I stammered, "It is very bad news of Uncle Jerry." "Is he dead?" "Yes, Father." "Let me see the letter." I gave it to him. So absorbed I was by the vista which was revealed to me by my inheritance that I could not grasp at the moment the tragic significance of the statements, which must have struck my father like a blow. Uncle Jerry had died alone in a hospital. He had been suffering for several years from an acute trouble. He had asked to be buried on the side of the mountain above his ranch. He had left me because I was his namesake, his house, and all properties, real and personal, of which he died possessed. The lawyer enclosed a copy of the will. He was not sure, he explained, how much income I would receive. Uncle Jerry's affairs were somewhat complicated. He thought the house was free from mortgages. He would let me know as soon as possible. When my father had read it all, he got out of bed. "We can't talk here. Our voices will disturb your aunt and grandmother. I'll dress and come to you, Jerry." When he came, we left the house and walked under the moon. And as we walked, we talked of Uncle Jerry. "This will be a sad blow to Mother and Mary," my father said. "Jerry went out of their lives long ago, but they will mourn the boy he used to be. Somehow, it doesn't seem fair that he should leave everything to me, Father." He talked that over with us when he was here. We wanted him to do it. He could give you the opportunities which none of the rest of us could give. For the first time I had a feeling that Uncle Jerry's legacy tied me to something, that it placed on me a certain responsibility for success, lest I disappoint those who had sacrificed so much. I tried to explain this feeling to my father. We had come to the little cemetery and stood leaning on the gate. We could see the white shaft of the stone which marked my mother's grave. She was often thus a part of our councils. "I wanted," I said at last, "to be free." "You are free, Jerry." "No," I said, "I'm not. The right thing for me to do would be to stay here and work, and fulfill all your ambitions for me, and Aunt Mary's, and grandmother's. But I don't want to do that. I want to live, Father. I want to live." He did not speak for several moments. Then he said, "Just what do you mean by living?" I faced him in the moonlight. "Well," I said, "I want something more vivid than life has brought you. I want color and glow, as you wanted it once upon a time. I want to feel, to the last quiver of sensation. I want to seek and adventure, like the man in my story." When we are young, we want all those things, Jerry. "Don't you want them now, Father? Don't you?" "Perhaps," he said. "But since I shall never have them, I am content." "But if you were young again?" "I don't know, Jerry. Honestly, I don't know. I chose what seemed best." "But for me, Father, if I marry Mimi—" "You are thinking of that?" "Of course. I have something now to offer her. I'm going back to St. Louis. I shall make her see what life can give us out there on Uncle Jerry's ranch." "What do you know of life on his ranch?" "The things he told me." "You mustn't depend too much on that." He checked himself, unlatched the gate and went in. I followed him, and we made our way among the stones until we came to a flat one like a bench, where Theresa and I had sat years before. There were roses blooming as there had been then. They showed like small white ghosts against the dark foliage. The wind had come up and the moon drifted in a sea of clouds. It cast spectral shadows over the headstones. And there I stood, young, red-blooded, urging my claims to a quick and stirring future. Your Uncle Jerry, my father was saying, saw everything through the eyes of his own optimism. He loved life, and he grasped at every experience that came to him. I'm not sure that it paid. I should not like to think that you must lose so much to get so little. The chances are, Jerry, that his ranch is not luxurious, and that your income will be small. I should advise you to go out there and see what you have to offer before you ask a woman to share it. But why wait? It might be too late. Too late? She may be married. I can only hope. Father, I've got to go to her. A cloud was over the moon. His voice came to me out of the darkness. Go if you will, and God go with you. I thought him wonderful then. I still think him wonderful, that in spite of his doubts, in spite of his wish to warn me, he should yet feel that my own adventure was mine, and he would not hold me back. Yet I know my selfishness. I had no thought of his loneliness. I was lost to all sense of his trouble, bereavement in the death of his brother, and in the desertion of his son. I was filled with the exquisiteness of hope. I was drunk with the fragrance of the roses and the beauty of the high-sailing moon. My inheritance made all things possible, and I was going back to Mimi. End of chapter 8. From the novel Peacock Feathers by Temple Bailey,